Hi everybody, it's Christina. Welcome back to Adventures in Polished Land. Today I have my end of February wrap up for 2025. I was able to complete 3 books since the last time we spoke. Full disclosure, one of them I finished on March 2nd, but I read the majority of it during February, so I'm going to include it in this video. So let's get started. The first book that I finished is Old Filth by Jane Gardam. I found this randomly at a used bookstore in New York City, and I picked it up because it sounded really interesting to me. We follow Edward Feathers, otherwise known as Old Filth, which stands for Failed in London, Try Hong Kong. So when we meet Edward, he is an 80-year-old widower who has retired to Dorset. He had a very successful career in Hong Kong as an attorney and a judge there. But now he's an older man, and we flash back in time in the next chapter to learn about when he was born. And we follow his life in a nonlinear format from there. So this book actually taught me quite a bit because I was not aware of Raj orphans, who were children born to British parents during the time of the British Empire. Their parents would work abroad, and then the children would be literally shipped back to the UK to be raised by foster parents or distant relatives. And so in this book, Edward is sent back from British Malaya to Wales, and we know that he lived with a foster family there who didn't treat him or his 2 cousins the best. But we don't really know what exactly happened. However, we learn about his life and his childhood growing up without his parents. His mother had died due to complications from childbirth, and his father is just completely hands-off. He really hasn't known his father at all. He meets him 1 or 2 times in his entire life. So this book is really interesting because, like I said, not only did I learn a lot, but Edward is a fascinating protagonist. I do really empathize with him, but he's more of a morally gray character, especially towards the end when he's an older gentleman. There's this one scene where he makes not only a homophobic remark, but several racist remarks right in a row, which was really strange because for the rest of the book, he doesn't appear to be that way. But I really enjoyed learning about his life, especially his relationship with his wife, Betty. I think that was a unique situation that we didn't learn a whole lot about in this book, and I think that's because there's a sequel to this, and it's from her perspective. So I am interested to continue on in this series because I'd like to learn more about how he and Betty met and her side of their relationship together. But overall, this is a really interesting book. I enjoyed being in Edward's life, and I would recommend it if you're interested in this type of topic. I gave this book a 4-star rating. So next up, I read The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. I have seen this book on and off BookTube for many years now, and I actually heard recently that this was being made into a musical by Sarah Bareilles, and if you didn't know, I'm a big Broadway musical fan, so when I found this at the thrift store a few months ago, I had to pick it up. This is a longer book. It's over 500 pages, but that didn't faze me at all once I got into the reading process. This book follows 6 teenagers in the 1970s. They meet at a summer camp for the arts in Western Massachusetts, and then the book follows them for the next several decades in their life, discussing all of their big life events, but also their friendship over time. If you like the format of books like A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara or Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, this is a similar concept where you really get to meet a group of friends and see how they grow and change as the years go on. And I quickly became very sucked into this story. I found it so captivating. There's so much that happens over the decades, and I really enjoyed reading about these characters. You can tell it's a great book when a very large book like this one reads quite quickly, and whenever I wasn't reading it, I wanted to be back in the story. For me, there were a few themes throughout that I found very interesting. Probably the biggest one is that of socioeconomic status. One of our characters, Jules, is the outsider of the group. She's from Long Island while everyone else is from Manhattan, and she has a very modest household. I would describe it as middle class, while most of the other characters come from very affluent homes. And as time goes on throughout Jules's life, you can really see how not being wealthy greatly affects her relationships with the other friends in her group, specifically with Ethan and Ash. One question that I kept asking myself throughout is, can you really be friends with somebody who has more money than you? And I think the easy answer is yes, of course. But then in this book, you see how power dynamics really play a role, and it can affect the relationship not only with decision making, but with people holding things over your head for decades, but also how can you really relate to somebody when you are struggling to pay your bills and they have a full staff of housekeepers and nannies and multiple homes that they own? It was a really interesting concept and one that I was thinking about throughout the entirety of the book. This book also has a plot line regarding sexual assault, which was really interesting to read because earlier in the month I had read Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and in this book I feel like I got the opposite perspective. So instead of being in the eyes of the survivor, we see the family of the perpetrator and what they're thinking and how they're willing to support him even though he may be at fault. But if you like character-driven novels where you get to see an inside look at someone's marriage, there's also a mental health aspect in this book that I found really heartbreaking, but also very relatable, I think, to a lot of people. I think this is a great book. I ended up giving it a full 5-star rating. I was so hooked on this book, and I definitely want to check out some of Meg Wolitzer's other books as well. I am really interested to see how they're going to adapt this to be a musical because so much happens that you're going to have to cut out a lot for a 2.5-hour, 3-hour show. If you've read this book, I would love to know your thoughts because I think it brings up a lot of interesting topics for discussion. And if you have a book club that is open to reading a book this long, I think this is a great pick. And then finally, I read Less is Lost by Andrew Sean Greer. This is the sequel to Less, which I read 2 years ago now. So our main character is Arthur Less. He is a novelist. In the first book, we follow him as he's traveling the world. His partner is getting married to someone else, and he tries to escape that embarrassment by taking every job he can overseas. And then in this book, we follow him in a similar predicament where one of his ex-lovers has passed away and he now has to come up with money to pay for the home that he's been living in rent-free for the last 10 years. And so once again, he takes any job that he can, but instead of traveling around the globe, he's traveling in the southern United States. This book started out really good for me. I found the writing captivating. I was laughing out loud in several moments, but then at some point in time, I just got bored and I was over it. I felt like there were so many little plot lines introduced that were not fully explored, and I think part of that is because this is a shorter book. So, for instance, we have a scene where he meets his long-lost father, and we know his father isn't doing so well health-wise, but then that plot line just kind of ends without more of an exploration into it. And there were other things like that throughout where I felt like the author would introduce a topic and then move away, and introduce a topic and then move away. And I was just ready for this book to be over. I can appreciate what the author's doing. I think there's a lot to learn here about what it's like being gay in the United States, especially in the South. Arthur is constantly worried about how people are going to think of him and if he'll be in danger at any point in time. So that was an interesting topic for discussion. But unfortunately, I gave this a 3-star rating. It wasn't a bad book. I was just over it. And I don't know that I would return to these Arthur Less books in the future, unfortunately. And I think I might actually unhaul the first one and this one because I don't see myself rereading them. So as for right now, I am currently reading The Center by Ayesha. Manazir Siddiqi. This is a library book that I checked out and I am really enjoying this. It's reading very quickly and I will be sure to update you on my thoughts in my next reading update video. But that's it for today. I am 3 books officially behind according to Goodreads, but that's really not all that bad. I'm not too concerned about it, and actually if we get to the end of the year and I've been about 2 books behind a month, that would be 88 books read, and that's way more than I've ever read in my entire life. At least in my adult years. I'm sure I read more than 88 books as a child, but it's not quite the same. I also did not check off any books on my reading map this month because this one is set in the UK and then overseas in British Malaya, so not on the US map. This one is set primarily in New York City, which I have already checked off New York on the map. And then I would say the other state that you could count is Massachusetts, which I've also already checked off the map. And then this one I thought about, it starts and ends in California, and he does travel all through the South, but I don't think there's one setting in this book. I feel like that's kind of the point, is he's traveling throughout the whole book, so I'm not going to check off any states on my map for this one. Overall, February was a really great reading month for me. I had 2 5-star books, which is very exciting, and I am looking forward to continuing on with library books in the month of March. If you want to know more about the rest of my TBR for March, be sure to check out the video that I posted last, which was a surprise TBR where I let random.org pick from my library list of books. I hope you are all doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video. Bye!